Greetings from Finland and the No Labels, No Walls Festival. Welcome to our free online festival taking place from the 14th to 19th of September on the theme of social impact. The festival programme consists of 100 different events made up of art, music, dance, documentaries, discussions, workshops, talks and many more, all based on positive social change and streamed to the audience live through the No Labels, No Walls website. Organised by Finnish, US and Scottish NGOs, this is a good opportunity to meet and connect with other socially minded people from around the world. Next up, and as part of Leap Sports series of Pride Active Conversations, former ski racer John Dickinson Lilley talks with Emma Dodds about his life as a gay man in professional sport. Enjoy.
Sport more inclusive. And so we've taken a line from that and lined up a fantastic array of LGBTIQ athletes and allies for this series. And those who joined us last week will know that we kicked things off with a tremendous interview from Philippa York that you can still see on our Facebook page. A couple of housekeeping things just now. Whether you're seeing this directly on Zoom or through the Facebook page, welcome. You can ask questions either way. If you're viewing on Zoom, you can pop into the Q&A function and ask your question there. And if on Facebook, you can just leave a comment on the broadcast and we'll feed those back through to Emma doing the interview today. Now, on to today's guest. We have the very inspiring John Dickinson Lilley with us today. And I'm looking forward to all of our interviews, but I'm especially looking forward to this one because I know that John is very thoughtful about many of the issues that we work with. And has spoken a lot about some of those issues. And so I'm pretty sure it's going to be a great conversation. Without further ado then, I'm going to hand you over to our brilliant interviewer, who is BT Sports broadcaster, Emma Dodds. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Hugh. John, good afternoon. Thanks for your time. How are you doing?
Delighted to be here.
Good. Well, as Hugh said, we're delighted to have you here as well. And as Hugh also mentioned, I know we've got a lot of attendees watching on Zoom and also on Facebook. This conversation is as much about John and I as it is about you guys. So if you do have a question, please send it in and I can put it to John as this conversation goes on over the course of the next half an hour, 40 minutes. We heard your song there, John, right at the very top of this webinar. You've raised your arm. Why did you pick that? Great song, by the way.
So it reminds me of when I was young, essentially. I'm now over the age of 40, and as my niece told me the other week, you're dead old, Uncle John. With particular emphasis on the dead as well. So I revel in it, and I love the 80s. So if you find me on Spotify, I've got an entire 80s playlist.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the channel that's on in my car as well, Heart 80s. You just can't beat it. It always brightens up the mood, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So as you mentioned, you're here, to join us today as our second guest on the webinar. You're a retired professional skier. I mean, as somebody myself who would have loved to have been a professional skier, it's an absolute pleasure to get your thoughts today. But let's talk a little bit before we go right back to the beginning about what you're doing now after professional sport and how you got into it.
I mean, I guess I'm really lucky in the sense that unlike most parasport's slightly different in that the profile tends to be a slightly older age bracket. Mm-hmm. And so I had a career before I started skiing. In fact, I only learned to ski when I was 29, when I'd lost my sight. So hadn't ever skied before. And there's a bit of a story there. And so after I retired, I was able to kind of go back into communication. So I'm now Director of Communications for Goldsmiths University of London, which is very exciting, lots of challenge, but is different, but amazingly enables me to apply a lot of the things that I learned as a ski racer, particularly around kind of managing pressure and stuff like that.
And I know you also, you're here with us as part of this Pride Active series, but, it's important, obviously, you have a platform, and I know you are somebody who uses that platform to the best of your ability to get your voice heard. Why is it important for you to do that visibility?
So, I grew up in the 80s. Growing up in the 80s, there were very few LGBT role models. You had people like Boy George, maybe Michael Cashman, who was the first gay character on EastEnders, a total hero. Ian McKellen, you know, the very, very few people. David Paisley was a gay character on Casualty in the 90s, I believe. Yeah, it was the 90s. And so there were very few role models, and they were mostly men. And I know that actually, for my own personal journey, if I'd had a role model, it would have made a massive difference. I didn't come out, I was found out. And so when I was found out, the only people that I could talk to was an LGB centre in Leicester. I was brought up in Leicestershire. And so there wasn't that support, and there was no one to point to that I could go, but you know what, I could be that could be me. So I think it's really important that if you do have a platform, that you try and use it and you try and offer something to someone else to say, do you know what, it's okay.
I totally agree. I mean, that visibility, very similar in my own story, that I didn't feel that I had those role models when I was younger, and I was, you know, relatively late in coming out. But it's so crucial now, and it's amazing to see even, you know, the likes of Ashlyn Harris and Ali Krieger just this week on the cover of magazines as a lesbian couple. You know, it's fantastic having that visibility there, and, you know, the fact we're sitting here doing this, you know, is an absolute pleasure, and shows things are moving in the right direction. But as you pointed out, it hasn't always been the case, has it? But, you know, you touched on there, you didn't come out as such, you were found out. I mean, how did that affect you as a youngster?
It was horrific. It was absolutely horrific, because my parents thought I'd got a girlfriend, which I sort of had. But my girlfriend knew I was gay before I did. She pointed it out to me. Amazing, and we're still friends. She's wonderful. But it was, you know, I think it's fair to say it was traumatic. My parents are lovely people, and they are absolutely amazing now. But you know, back then, you know, in the 90s, not easy. They're Christians, so they kind of didn't quite get it. So that, I think their faith proved a challenge, and it was something to be ashamed of. It was something to keep secret. And so they said, well, you can't tell anyone, because if you tell people, you're going to get beaten up, or, you know, you're not going to be able to get into university, and all of these other things. So I think they've got their idea, and you know, they thought automatically about things like grandchildren, and you know, because at the time, that was it. Like, if you were gay, you didn't have kids. End of story. So I mean, to be fair, I turned into a ski racer, so couldn't afford children.
We'll get to that later. But yeah, that was obviously, you know, you were, how old did you say you were there? 13, 14 when that happened?
14.
14, yeah. So, you know, a very impressionable age as well for somebody discovering themselves, and also then having to communicate that not through choice. But I know you had that LGBT plus centre that you went to near your home. How important was that for you, you know, mental health wise, and to be with like-minded people, you know, in a comfortable, confident way?
It was critical. I mean, you know, this was during the era of Section 28 as well. So it wasn't local authority funded. It was funded by local people, by the LGBT community. And I actually had counselling, and it was a free counselling service. And so it enabled me to reconcile myself to my sexuality relatively early on. It was very unusual to be able to access that kind of service, but it made a massive difference for me. I think it built my confidence up. And do you know what? I then turned into a bit of a gobby teenager who maybe didn't handle it with my parents in quite the way that I could have done. But actually, I think, you know, on reflection, whilst it may have been imperfect, actually it was probably the right thing for me to be able to be kind of that punchy and that go-getter about my sexuality. And of course, I got found out at school, because that was bound to happen.
Yeah. And what about the way you were treated at school? Again, just with everything you've touched on, you know, the era that it was, how was that? How did that affect you?
As you might imagine, lots of bullying, locker being vandalised on a daily basis. I went to a Catholic school, and so every time my locker got vandalised, I had to clean it, and then I was put in detention. And so the problem was me; it wasn't other people's behaviour. And so that was a real challenge. But amazingly, I I visited Leicester a few years ago, and went out to the local gay club and bumped into my old head of biology, who and he said, I had no idea what you went through. And I was talking to him, he said, you should have just come to me, and I would have totally helped you.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, I was young, I didn't have confidence. And so the big takeaway for me, and the thing that I would say to absolutely anybody now, is if you feel that you need help, ask. Like, whether that's Samaritans, whether that's the LGBT switchboard, whoever it is, ask for some support. And it may not be within your family or your friends network, but don't allow yourself to suffer in silence, because there is help out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, that's in whatever scenario it is that you actually need help in. But I mean, there's been several things that have really defined who you are, haven't there, over the course of your lifetime? But I know that, you saw homophobic violence as well, and quite dramatic violence as well. How did that mould and shape the person that you have turned into now?
It turned me into a campaigner. So I think the thing so I came out, and then I had a really amazing friend, a woman called Wendy, who she came out when she was 55 and after 6 kids. And she was a mature student. She'd gone back to university. So she's doing all these life-changing things. And, I think about her every day. She sadly passed away a few years ago, but she's just such an inspirational woman. And so we would go out clubbing and have great fun. And we went out together one night with a bunch of friends. And as we walked out of this club in Leicester called Street Life, I mean, a unique venue, let's put it like that. It was also one of the only venues, so there wasn't much choice. And there was a gang of thugs waiting outside, and 2 of my friends got caught by them. The rest of us managed to escape, and they've been wheelchair users ever since. Need to be active.
Absolutely. And as I said earlier, here we are today with platforms for us all to share experiences and come together. And, Pride Month, obviously, which was originally what this series was about, was due to be held then. But there's so much more to talk about on that topic. But I'm just going to branch off into sport, because obviously, that is a key element for you. And it's given you, again, a huge platform, hasn't it, to have a voice on this. But how do you think, just first of all, attitudes to disability sport have changed since you first got involved in skiing?
So disability sport's a fascinating one. So on the one hand, I think you look at 2012 and everyone goes, wow, we can see a different aspect to disabled people. And on the other hand, it's really driven quite an inverse narrative. And by that, I mean, quite often people will go, well, of course you're a para-athlete, because surely every disabled person can be a para-athlete. If they just change their mindset and think a bit harder, they can overcome any barrier. And the truth is, yes, I can ski at 70 miles an hour. I'm still blind. I mean, I get off a pair of skis and I've got a guide dog. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not blind, and it's not about a mindset. And so I think it's done something really powerful and very profound. But equally, not every able-bodied person can be an Olympian, and it's just about remembering that and kind of balancing that in people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And just talk to us about how you got involved in skiing, because you mentioned earlier that you didn't pick it up until later on in life when you'd actually had another career. But how you got involved in para skiing?
So I was sitting in. So I worked at a charity in London at the time, and my mate Moira said, I'm going away skiing in Zermatt with a bunch of friends. You'll like them. We've got this amazing flat for kind of hardly anything, so it's a last minute booking. Would you and your partner, my ex, want to come along? So I said, oh, do you know what? I can't ski. This is clearly a disaster. And she said, look, I'm sure someone somewhere does that stuff. So I went and kind of Googled and then found an instructor called Ben, who said, no, absolutely. I will train you as a specialist instructor trained by a charity called Disability Snowsport UK, based up in Aviemore. Great charity, and that was the start of it, really. So I piled off to Zermatt, which if you've ever skied, Zermatt's incredible. And bizarrely during that week, I managed to rupture my ACL.
Oh no!
Yeah, because I basically just took off. So I was going too fast, wasn't able to turn because I'd only just learned to ski, managed to do my knee in.
Oh man.
But 7 months later, having done lots and lots of rehab, wandered around London on crutches with a guide dog, gone through all kinds of stuff, I was back skiing the following Christmas.
That's impressive. Brilliant.
So I was determined to get back on skis
Yeah.
because at that point I'd decided that, you know, I like skiing.
Amazing. I mean, it's such. I mean, forgive me though. I mean, it's a great sport. You know, it's recreational. Off you pop on holiday, but doing it professionally and training like you know for major events to become a British, to become a European champion is a completely different kettle of fish here. So to go from that into professionally competing, you know, as a blind person as well,
Yeah.
how on earth did that transition take place? Because that is quite a leap.
It is. So I basically, Ben had coached some blind ski racers, and had said, look, do you know what? You've got the makings of a good skier. You'll need to do lots of work, but I'll put you in touch. So he put me in touch with the British Disabled Ski Team, as it was known at the time, and I basically went along, and they were like, okay, so you're too fat. You're not very good at skiing. So you need to fix your basic level of skiing for a start, and then you need to lose quite a lot of weight. So, and I can never quite remember, but I think I lost between 7 and 8 stone. I have this amazing before picture where I look a little bit like Elton John. It's not a strong look for me. And so I went away and did that, and you know, I've never really been that much of a gym bunny. Got into the gym, was going to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, so nothing too major, but actually going from no activity to some activity makes a huge difference. And then I went for a trial, and a second trial, and they said, you know what, do you want to join the development squad, because we think we can do some work with you. So they then put me on a kind of quite a robust fitness regime, as you might imagine. And I went to the ski centre at Hemel Hempstead twice a week.
Right, got you, yeah.
And so I was doing 6 hours a week indoors on, you know, an indoor slope.
Yeah, incredible. We've actually had the question in because, again, for those who may have joined us a little bit late, the floor is open to you as well. So if you do have a question for John, please just ping it over on Facebook or Zoom it, and we can put the questions to him. But we've actually had one here from the Leap Sports ambassador, and it's para-athlete Stefan Hogan Radu, who would like to know, I know how much work and dedication it takes to be a performance athlete, but how do you keep your motivation up during the training sessions, or how did you keep your motivation up?
It could be really difficult at times. I think there are 2 bits to it for me. So there's that whole thing. I think being out actually helped me because I was able to be a little bit more me. But I guess it was the fact that I hadn't realized quite how competitive I was. I always knew I was determined, but there's a big difference between quite determined and sort of basically stubborn, and being competitive. And I've discovered this really competitive side in me. And there are 2 or 3 very amazing men's visually impaired skiers. A guy called Jon Santacana, who's one of the Spanish skiers. It's just incredible. Mac Mojo from Canada, another incredible skier. And so I was like, do you know what? I want to be like those boys. And so that was my focus. And so actually I was sitting there, and my focus was, I'm 10 seconds off. You know, so not an 8th or a 10th, but you know, I'm 10 seconds off. I need to close the gap. And that then changes your mindset. What do you do to close the gap? Get lighter, get fitter, get better in terms of technique, speed, whatever it might be.
There you go. That's Stefan's question coming in there for John. If you have one, ping them over and we can put them to John. You mentioned there how you think actually, you know, being out helped you there. I was going to ask you that about just, you know, how did it affect you as a professional athlete being, you know, openly out, and how did your fellow athletes treat you, for example?
It was difficult. You know, absolutely, it was difficult. I think I felt quite isolated at times, because you know, there is any sporting environment can be quite kind of male, and it was very male. And I had some really challenging experiences. So you know, there's lots of kind of very latent microaggressions. I mean, you know, it's it's an easy concept to understand, but I remember being introduced to a new member of coaching staff, and they said, "Oh, I've heard about you, blind and gay, that's tough."
Oh, wow.
That was the first thing they ever said to me, and they meant it in a kind of, in a jocular fashion.
Yeah.
And I just sat there thinking, so the most important thing that someone felt you needed to know was that I was gay. Like, of all the things, that was a really important bit of information. So you didn't necessarily go, "Oh, so and so, is a sit skier and they're straight."
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and isn't that my story to tell?
Yeah.
Even if you're out. So, and I think skiing's different to many sports in that the coaching structure and the environment is very self-led. So some of the things that you see in other sports where there's a really strong infrastructure, where equality and diversity training is compulsory, it's not quite the same. It's not quite the same. So there's some of those fundamental differences, I think, can prove really challenging.
Yeah, and I'd actually really love your thoughts on how you think that can improve, especially, with GB snow sports and various different governing bodies, particularly I think within the winter sports, because as you say, it's very different to other bodies that we have out there. But what more can they do to help? Especially, I think, making people feel comfortable, but also, being there for athletes who are out.
I think you kind of almost start at a very basic level by saying, "Do you know what? We don't know what we don't know. So can you tell us what we don't know?" And then listening to LGBT athletes and their experiences, and then you kind of get a sense of some of the challenges. Because when you know the challenges, then you can think about the solutions. What you can't do necessarily is look at that in a vacuum and go, "Well, actually, do you know what? We'll just go away, do our thing, and then hopefully we'll get it right." And you can learn from, so British Athletics have set up their amazing LGBT network, brilliant stuff. So you can learn from other organisations, but actually, snow sports is very different. You spend 120 days a year away with people that you may not necessarily ever want to spend a day with, let alone 120 of them.
Yeah.
You live in this microcosmic bubble, and that brings along its own challenges. So I think firstly, accept that you don't know all those things, and then say, right, what are your experiences and how can we convert that into some meaningful learning? So that would be my starting point, I think, and be prepared to make a mistake. It's okay to make mistakes. I think it's absolutely fine. I'd rather make a mistake and someone goes, "Oops, probably didn't get that quite right," but it's okay because we've listened and we've learned. That's definitely okay. And I think any organisation should have that level of confidence to make a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. And just while we were talking about that, we've actually had a question in here from an anonymous attendee that says, "There isn't much LGBT plus visibility in UK snow sport or UK parasport. Should that be a concern? And if so, how could governing bodies help to improve the situation?" I mean, you've just sort of answered it, but how do we help, have more visibility within that?
So I think, I've freely offered to GB Snow Sport to do some kind of ambassadorial work with them, to come in and talk to them and stuff. And I'm kind of waiting to hear back. I hope they take me up on the offer. I was GB's first out snow sport athlete. And I'm incredibly proud of that, frankly. I genuinely think it's about listening and learning. I think you can go and listen to other organisations, as I've said. But I think it's okay to make mistakes, and equally, it's okay for people like me to maybe potentially be a critical friend. That's okay too. But equally, I need to know that I can't be critical all the time. I have to help them. And so I think, and I think that's incumbent on anybody who is involved in any sport that might be critical of an approach. It's absolutely fine to be a critical friend, but also give people the space to make mistakes, because if you give them the space, they have the confidence to fix and to learn. And I think that's where probably generally anyone who is an advocate or a campaigner needs to strike a better balance. I think sometimes we probably get too harsh too quick.
Yeah.
And so if you don't give people a space, actually what happens is, you almost fall into a pattern of, a PR approach to crisis management. It turns into a crisis, not a point of learning. And I think that's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there about the reaction of some of your fellow athletes as well when you were competing. You were out long before you were competing. Did you expect it to be an issue, or were you prepared for it to be an issue?
I was prepared for it to be an issue in the sense that every LGBT person, understands what it's like to eternally come out. We do it every single day. You kind of drop it into a conversation and then wait to see how someone responds. So, that's the thing. I think the thing that I found particularly difficult is that not having any other LGBT athletes, it's really hard to understand what it's like to be LGBT. So, one of the examples that I frequently use is the fact that, other people would frequently say, oh, that's gay, or, you skied like a gay, or you skied like a homo, or whatever. Like all of those kind of really crap, what I call kind of like deadly low grade, rubbish kind of microaggressions, and kind of saying, when I challenged that, someone would say, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Like, well, you were using it in a kind of negative, pejorative way. So clearly you did mean it like that, and you've just been called out. And everyone would go, well, do you know what? Maybe you're just being a bit sensitive, JDL. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not sensitive. I remember on one occasion, there was an open discussion at the table where one athlete advanced the view that being gay was a choice and was cultural, and I challenged it, and I was alone in challenging it. Now, I completely understand that other athletes would go, oh my God, this is going to turn into a scene, head down, clear the room. I absolutely get that. But equally, that experience is isolating. And to not have anyone step in and go, actually, that's not right, or, you need to think, even something you say, look, you know what? I don't have a view on this, but you need to think about what you say and to who and when. So there are examples like that, and I think it's just important that there are other people that are in there, and you're not alone advocating.
That's it, isn't it? Someone else is there fighting your corner for you, isn't it? It's just knowing that you have that support. I mean, I know you've said in the past that your performances could have been better if you didn't have to worry about this. I mean, I don't want to use the word regrets, but would you have done things differently at all if you did it again?
Yeah, I mean, obviously some of that happened at a point in time.
Yeah.
I think the world has moved on a bit, attitudes have moved on a bit. I've matured a bit.
Yeah.
I would be less angry, I think, and less defensive, and more kind of, I want to understand why you're saying that, and what is it that you need from me that can help you change your view, or whatever. So I would have a different approach now, but that's because I've grown up and I'm a bit more mature. I think the impact that it had in terms of being my authentic self is actually really important. And I was very lucky in that I had a sports psych, and so I was able to talk to a sports psych about how I felt, how angry and upset I was, and she was an absolute star, and really helped me understand and process some of that stuff, and was really very much like, actually, do you know what, some of this stuff is just crap, and you have to treat it as crap at some point. You either have to let go and focus on your performance, or you can focus on that and let it undermine your performance. Now, that is a very difficult process to go through, and it's not as easy as I've just said, and sometimes it did get into my head, and it was a thing that I worried about more than my skiing, and then you'd see that in the results. And so I think there's a massive learning point for all NGBs, which is you need to create a space for LGBT athletes to perform. One of the most amazing facts, and I love this fact, so apologies if you've heard it before, but essentially, if you got all the LGBT athletes at Rio and stuck them in one team, that team would have placed in the top 20. How awesome is that? Incredible. And those are just the ones that we know about. So what about all of those athletes that aren't out?
Yeah. It's an incredible. I read that in somewhere else, and it is absolutely incredible that what you've just said, where they place in the medal table, and as you say, it's just the ones we know about. Here's a question: if you hadn't been out when you were skiing, would you have come out? Would you have had the confidence to do that, or do you think the experiences, you might not have had those experiences, obviously, because people didn't know, but do you think that would have deterred you?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Because actually, you know, on balance, is it easier to kind of cope with the challenge of maybe not being your authentic self, but not having lots and lots of kind of, you know, some of the low grade nonsense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I probably would have done. I was married at the time, so I didn't have a choice. I couldn't kind of hide my ex.
Of course, there's that. We've actually had a question in here from an anonymous attendee. Is it easier to be out, in inverted commas, in so-called minority sport than other sport? And perhaps this is reflected in the amount of out athletes that there are in other sports.
I don't know. I think that's a really tough question. I think from my own perspective, I think it's an extra layer, because quite often para sports teams are smaller. So there's a smaller sense of community. I mean, you know, in some of the bigger sports like cycling, for example, I could imagine that in paracycling you probably have slightly more room and more space, and there's a greater infrastructure. But para sports is drastically drastically underfunded, and it's funded very differently. So you can take snow sports in the UK. There's an able-bodied team that perform, you know, really, really well on the international stage. And then you've got a para team which wins medals at a Paralympic level. And yet there's a disproportionate level of funding. There's less funding for a para team. I think we won 4 silvers, a gold and a bronze at the last Winter Games, versus a couple of medals in the able-bodied teams, and yet you see more funding disproportionately. So I think there's a real challenge around kind of perception and value, and around, you know, building a very strong pipeline of talent as well, so you can actually start to grow the parasporting movement.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just going back to your own experiences, how do you feel that your sort of sexuality positively enhanced your performances and worked for you in professional sport?
Do you know, I think what it did, it gave me a really clear sense of identity. I knew who I was. I was comfortable with who I was, and so I was able to use that as a source of strength. I had an amazing partner. I've got a new 7 years amazing partner who also supported me through the process, and so I've been really lucky in that I've had that strength, and that gives you an enormous amount of power. And just knowing who you are gives you that confidence to step out into the world, put your best foot forward, and all that stuff. So I think it definitely helps. It's not all downsides. There's lots of positivity.
Yeah, we've actually had a question in here from somebody who I think you know, Scott Cuthbertson.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah, Scott's watching on Facebook. He said, we were on the NUS LGBT committee together back in the day. You've always been a bit of an activist, and clearly an LGBTI equality is very important to you. How much of that activism did you take into your sporting career?
All of it. All of it. I think it was my early experiences in Leicester and some of the negativity that led me into the NUS LGBT movement. And it was that kind of education, that politicization, that sense of community, and kind of some of the work that we did to right the wrongs, challenging Section 28, campaigning for, you know, civil partnerships, all of that stuff really important. I mean, the thing that does shock me, and you know, this is familiar territory for any activist, some of the issues that people like Scott and I were campaigning on, like the NHS blood ban, still here. Still here. And it, you know, it utterly appalls me that you know, what, 20 years on, we're still in a position where the same half-assed policies based on the same very bad data leads to a blanket ban, when actually, you know, if you're heterosexual, you can literally sleep with anybody as many times as you like, and that's totally okay. But if you're gay, absolutely not. And it's even worse now when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic. Sorry to mention COVID-19, everybody. We've managed it for quite a while.
For 36 minutes we got through, John.
Desperate for blood plasma, except if you're a gay or bisexual man, or a man who has sex with men, and then no, actually, because we're just not going to do it. And so you know, you just sit there thinking, what's going on? And that's lawful discrimination. Equally, you get the stuff around LGBT teaching in schools. I mean, come on, that isn't even a debate. We saw the Parliament Petitions Committee last week asking for views on whether conversion therapy is wrong. Why is that a debate?
Yeah.
You know, people in the UK, there was a poll last week, I think, saying people in the UK thought it was illegal. Because why wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
You know, you can't kind of pray away the gay. That's not how it works. It's, yeah, sorry, got started there.
Which are evidence of how far we've come, but again, these issues show how far we still have to go, don't they? And it's, you know, we have to keep going. You know, it's just one of those things. But I mean, that leads me on nicely to, you know, how big of a role do you feel that straight allies have to play in the fight for change, you know, and helping with the conversations that we're already having within our own community, but it has to go wider.
Massive. I think absolutely massive. I mean, you know, as you observed right at the beginning, I've got a platform and I use it. But, you know, when you compare my power to that of a straight, able-bodied person, they still have more power than me, and they still have more influence, and they can have conversations in spaces where I can't. You know, so actually, if you imagine that you've got a straight bloke who can have a conversation with other straight blokes about why being LGBT is okay, and why, do you know what, probably don't fancy them. It's all right. You know what I mean? To have some of those really mundane conversations that I've been over having those conversations for about 25 years. And so for someone to do that, and some of those really simple conversations are incredibly powerful, all the way through to someone that's, you know, absolutely willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with you, whether that's an issue at work, whether that's an issue, you know, at home, whatever it might be. I think allyship is one of the most important and significant developments in the liberation movement over the last 10 years. I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the questions are coming in thick and fast. Esther Murphy is asking, do you need to make decisions sometimes about whether to be the athlete, the gay athlete, the disabled athlete, or just gay?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I mean, most of the time I try and just be John, if that makes sense. And it's quite interesting in that people all, you know, particularly for me, I kind of do kind of public engagement and all that kind of stuff. So stuff like this, and people sometimes almost define you through the question that they ask or the way that they have a conversation with you. You know, if I'm out and about, sometimes the conversation starts because I've got a guide dog, and he's just a charming, gorgeous black lab. And so people just go, oh my God, he's gorgeous, what's his name? And so that's the first conversation. It's not, hello, my name is, who are you? It's, oh my God, your dog is gorgeous. So sometimes you're defined. I mean, what I tend to do is if I'm kind of actively talking, I kind of almost shape my identity according to the audience in terms of what will resonate most with them and what will be most interesting. As opposed to kind of what works with me. I mean, what I would say, absolutely, is that, you know, whether you're disabled or whether you're LGBT or whether you're all of those things, take power from those things. You know, they are part of who you are, and they're things that you should and must be proud of. Absolutely. And so, you know, it doesn't matter the situation. Harness that power, and you know what? Stick a smile on your face, if nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. Ian, over on Facebook, do you have any advice for a young person with a disability who is interested in getting into sport?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, try as many different sports as you can. There are some amazing organisations out there. So Activity Alliance are a great federation in England that help offer different kinds of sports. Then you've got British Blind Sports, who offer loads of taster days and stuff like that. Then there are some amazing charities like Disability Snow Sports UK or Backup, which offer different sporting opportunities. So there are loads of different organisations out there. Go out and try stuff. When I was younger, I wasn't given those opportunities because people made assumptions about what I could or couldn't do. Now there's much more inclusive coaching advice. Sport England and the other home nation sports councils, you know, fund organisations to do better at disability participation. And also, don't pressure yourself. You don't have to become a Paralympian. Like that's not a thing, right? You could just want to go and play football, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, there you go, Ian. I hope that answers your question. Another subject I'm really interested to get your thoughts on is that, we hear a lot about, especially in professional sport, that athletes are scared to come out, worried to come out, in case it leads to loss of sponsorship.
Mhm.
I mean, again, you highlighted the differences of being an able-bodied athlete to being a para athlete, and the level of funding, etc., that goes with it. I mean, from your own experience, do you think these are valid worries initially? And from your own experiences, how was it with sponsors and obviously that side of your life?
Yeah. So, I mean, from my own personal perspective, I never had cash sponsors. So para athletes rarely do. And if you do, you've got to have won like a Paralympic medal and probably a gold or possibly a silver. I was incredibly fortunate to be sponsored by Salomon, name check, who, supported me for years with equipment and so on. And that's an enormous cost. But actually as a blind athlete, I had to pay for my guides costs, so my guides equipment. So that was at least 16 pairs of skis a year. That was double hotel fees, flights. I think my last year of skiing, I spent about £42,000.
Wow, right.
Because it's just double. And so I think there's a real need, if you want to invest in a para talent pipeline, actually the funding bodies need to look at it in a slightly different way because of those additional costs. I think in terms of, I understand the fear actually, and I have often wondered whether me being an out athlete impacted on sponsorship, because I'm quite a good salesman. So I do wonder whether that had an impact, and whether people looked at my social media and went, oh my God, he's a bit gobby. Maybe not. Maybe this isn't who we want to be associated with our brand. So I can see the fear, and particularly, now, football is the really obvious go-to example, right? I can see why a footballer who has an entire persona and an entire following based around a perceived identity would go, actually, there is too much resting on this. And it's not just about sponsors, and it's not just about the job. It's the fact that your entire life has been curated probably by people like me. They've got media advisors and other things who are helping to shape and curate this image, and all of a sudden there's this persona that they may not feel entirely in control of anymore. I think it's social media has transformed the world. And so I think there are so many different pressures that feed into that. What I would say, and I tweeted this at the weekend, so if you've seen it, sorry. Coming out is a destination, right? It is not something that you do with the snap of a finger. Getting to that destination is your personal journey. Own it, enjoy it, make the decision when it's right for you. No one has any right to judge anybody for when they should or shouldn't come out. And frankly, LGBT sports media made a great point. It's deeply unhelpful to speculate, because you just create more fuss and noise about something that is essentially shouldn't be. So whenever it's right for you, do it, but don't feel judgment, don't feel shame. You make the right decision for you, your family, and those that you care about when it's right for you.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? And I think that those of us in this community, we've all got our own story to tell, and there's all reasons behind it, isn't it? That's really the way it goes. But we've had an anonymous question in here. I'm very conscious of time because we are pretty much out of time. But we'll get to this question, John. What is your top tip to get more LGBT plus people interested in sport?
My top tip, I think my top tip would be, particularly to sports clubs, be open, right? Think about the things that maybe you could do differently. So it might be around the use of language. It might be around thinking, actually, do you know what? If someone says something, I'm going to challenge that. There's loads of resources out there. Stonewall have produced a ton of good stuff. Look at all of those resources. I know Leap Sports have a ton of stuff. There are loads of organizations out there to help you be more inclusive. Find that information. There's no lack of support out there for clubs and individuals who want to get it right. And it's, again, it goes back to that fear of failure. Don't be afraid of getting it wrong. And if you're not sure, ask a question. How would you like me to refer to you? Do you have specific pronouns? What do you need from me to make you feel more comfortable here? after the first session, if someone turns up, let's just say they're going to try hockey, after the first session, say, hey, how did this go for you? Was there anything that worked? Was there anything that didn't work? Like, use that opportunity as an experience. And if someone says, you know what, actually hockey's not for me, but this happened and it just made me feel a bit uncomfortable, or this happened and it was absolutely incredible. And so it's just, you know, use all of those opportunities for really informal learning.
You know, we could sit here all day and chat about this. I mean, some great advice. It's been amazing to hear your own story as well, and obviously just, you know, the way you took that, you know, from everyday life and into professional sport, and obviously how well you did in professional sport as well. It's fantastic to hear from you, and you know, you're a great advocate for the community, and it's a pleasure to have you on here. But we are out of time. But I want to say on behalf of from myself, Emma Dodds, thank you very much for joining us here on this Pride Active webinar series. And well, we look forward to following you on social media and no doubt talking to you again soon.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And have a brilliant day, everybody.
Yeah, have a brilliant day. Thank you all very much for watching. I'm now going to bring Hugh back in just to say a little vote of thanks and to sign us off officially. But John, thank you once again from me, and thanks to everyone for watching.
Hi there. Yeah, so just on behalf of Leap Sport Scotland, I just want to say a massive thank you to John for such a fascinating discussion. So many different themes there actually, and it's so hard to get in depth in every one of them, but I know that there's so many different groups that you'll have inspired by today's conversation, and a whole lot of stuff around activism that I want to ask you more about as well. So no doubt we'll keep in touch as well.
Absolutely.
Just a thank you also to our media partners, Pride of the Terraces and Sports Media LGBT+, and of course to the wonderful Emma Dodds for interviewing duties today. You can, you'll see on this side of me, I think, there are some great interviews still lined up. We actually have a bumper week next week. We've got two. So next Wednesday is Beth Allen, who the sign up is open for already. And Beth is a wonderful character, and I'm sure that's going to be a fascinating interview. And then next Saturday, we're taking part in the Football Pride event. And so Amy McDonald from Rangers Women's Football Club is going to be the interview for the day. So please do spread the word. Please do get signed up. If you're one of the SGBs or NGBs who are online today, then do take John up on his offer. And also please do check out the resources on our website. So until next week, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.